Hi, I'm Max Gale, and I was asked to narrate this film because the filmmakers knew that my wife had died of cancer, and I had dealt in a deeply personal way with the dilemma their film addresses. Choosing a therapy for her was confusing, paralyzing, anguishing, sometimes enraging. On the one hand, the doctors held little hope that they would have a cure for her. On the other hand, they were resistant to the many alternative approaches. They seemed to have a definite and sincere point of view, and yet they seemed to know so little about these other therapies. I had to wonder, if a cancer cure were discovered outside of formal medical institutions, would these doctors ever know about it? Would it ever reach the general public? Of course it would, you might say, but consider this. There are scores of alternative cancer clinics around the world claiming high success rates. Yet most of these treatments have been banned in the United States or driven out of the country without an investigation. Why? The dissident practitioners say that it has to do with medical politics, that their medical point of view is being suppressed. There is a disturbingly similar pattern that actually does run through most of their stories. To get to the heart of the dilemma, we have chosen to look in depth into one of these alternative clinics, because the story of the Hoxsey cancer treatment is a classic case history of these medical politics. Many patients believe the Hoxsey treatment cures cancer.
She had had one breast removed, and then later they found cancer in the other breast, and they wanted to take the other one off, and she wouldn't allow it. But of course she was getting worse, and like I said, she heard her family planning her funeral, and she got up out of her sick bed and said, "Take me to Mexico." So they brought her down here on a wheelchair, and now she looks great, and she feels great, and she's fine. And they had given her just a few weeks to live.
My father died of cancer, my brother-in-law died of cancer, one of our best friends at Yakima died of cancer, and they all went the operation, chemotherapy, radiation route. They are all dead. But the people who, we know so many people who have come here, and they're still alive.
I decided that I was not going to take chemotherapy, I was not going to take radiation. I told my doctor that. I said, I'll die first, I'd just soon go out, but none of that. Because I've had friends I've seen what happened to them. But when they mentioned Hoxsey to me, I lit up. I said, hey, let's go.
Medical authorities claim Hoxsey is a hoax. They outlawed the therapy in the United States without a scientific investigation. Hoxsey nurse Mildred Nelson took the treatment from Texas to Tijuana in 1963. Her biomedical center was the first alternative clinic to go from the U.S. to Mexico. She has been treating cancer with Hoxsey for 40 years. She claims impressive results.
We still run approximately 80% cure rate. And I know you're not supposed to say cure for at least 5 years, but I've known some of them 40 years that are still surviving. So I guess maybe we should still say a survival rate, but nevertheless they have no problems. So we assume they no longer have cancer because we cannot pick it up.
An 80% cure rate? If Mildred Nelson is even partially right, the number of people dying needlessly is a scandal. But her claim is unproven because a definitive scientific test has never been done. But we do know what the medical profession has achieved in its celebrated war on cancer.
We've lost the war on cancer. Since the 1950s, the outlook for most cancer patients has remained the same, a 1 in 3 chance of living for 5 years after diagnosis using conventional therapies, surgery, radiation, chemotherapy, drugs. The fact is that today, 2 out of 3 American cancer patients will be dead before 5 years.
If conventional therapy has such limited results, why isn't the medical profession willing to investigate alternative approaches?
Apparently, there is more than a political border between country and country, but also a philosophical border that these doctors will not let their patients cross. And it's bad. This doesn't work on behalf of the patient. This is a battle, apparently, between them and us. And we don't want a battle to exist. This should be united work, working together to bring people health.
In a fight for their lives, some patients cross those borders. Each day, a van full of hopeful cancer patients travels from San Diego, California to Tijuana, Mexico. Doctors in the U.S. classified 90% of them as terminal cases. Over the years, thousands of such patients have said the Hoxsey treatment cured them.
Well, I had a melanoma in my arm, and they operated on my arm, but they said I had to have chemotherapy and radiation. And I was too weak for that, my husband thought, so he said, no, we're going to the clinic. And I have gotten real good results from coming to the clinic. I know when I first started, I only weighed 111 pounds, and now look at me. And now I haven't been back for 5 years for any treatment on my arm. I just come back now for a checkup. When Mildred did get the cancer out, it was like a ball, hard ball. In fact, when she dropped it in the trash can, I thought it was a golf ball because it bounced.
It was at least the size of a golf ball or
Yeah.
larger. Yes, it went up into this muscle, and it's tied down with scar tissue now. Because, as I said, it extended up in this muscle. We just took out a huge big thing
Yeah.
here.
About 2 years ago, actually 2 years ago to the day, found out I had cancer, and the doctor recommended mastectomy. So went into the hospital and had a mastectomy, and then he suggested that perhaps I needed chemotherapy once a week for a year. Well, at the time, I also had spots on my liver, and when I recovered from my mastectomy, I was going to probably have liver surgery. So we decided against the chemotherapy because we thought it wasn't such a good idea, really. Meanwhile, friends of ours drove down to tell us about this clinic, Biomed Clinic, that she had found. So my husband and I decided we would investigate, and I think that's the best decision we ever made. My surgeon knows I go. He probably didn't like the idea, so we just kind of ignore the fact that I come. Although he himself admits now that my liver is completely cleared up. No cancer cells at all.
The clinic uses two treatments, an internal and an external. The internal treatment is the Hoxsey tonic.
The tonic comes in a bottle like this. And the tonic is basically, it's concentrated for ease of handling. You should mix it before you take it. You don't take it directly from the bottle. What happens is this: the tonic on the inside of the body works by several methods. First of all, it works by a process of detoxification. Second of all, and what I consider the most important, it helps build up the immune system.
It's very simple. It doesn't make you ill. Your hair doesn't fall out like chemo. And it's almost too good to be true, you might think. But it does work. It consists of herbs and potassium iodide. And the diet is very, very easy to follow.
They start with a diet. They're not allowed pork, vinegar, tomatoes, carbonated drinks, alcohol, bleached flour or bleached sugar, and the salt is really limited. Probably the greatest success comes with the patient's attitude. And when they come in the front door saying, I'm in here to get some medicine because I'm going to get well, then I'm just as happy as they are. And when they come through the door saying, well, I don't think anything's going to help, but they wanted me to do this, You can't make them get well. They have to want to do it themselves.
A non-toxic herbal tonic, a nutritional program, an attitudinal approach to healing. Harmless though it seems, this treatment ignited one of the most bitter controversies in medical history. It started a cancer war between organized medicine and one man, founder Harry Hoxsey. The trouble began with what seemed like good news.
And we now have in our files and our records many, many thousands of case histories and records, pathological proof, X-ray photographic studies that we do positively cure cancer, both internal and external. And we now have records proving that the cure stands up for many, many years, as far back as over 20 years here in Texas.
I think, my God, he's telling me the biggest lies I ever heard. This couldn't be right. And I'd listen to this for a few days, and finally I'd pick out the biggest one I thought he'd told me. And I'd go check. And when I got checking, it was right. The man hadn't lied about it at all. And finally I realized he didn't have to lie. He was telling the truth, but it was the wildest stories I'd ever heard in my life when it came to medicine.
He had this great skill as a salesman. Clearly, however, he had no belief that this treatment was useful. He was a great liar.
You know, it takes lots of nerve to put up a big, nice place in a big city like Dallas and hold yourself out as being able to furnish medicines that'll cure cancer. It takes nerve to do that. I don't believe a man that knew he was lying about it could do it.
He was doing his thing, and he had no business doing it. In fact, Hoxsey met both the legal and the dictionary definition of a quack. One who pretends to medical skill which he does not possess.
It was easy for the medical profession to paint Hoxsey as a quack. He fit the image perfectly.
This book, entitled You Don't Have to Die, is filled with dynamite. In fact, it should have been printed on asbestos paper. I give you names, times, dates, names of doctors, names of institutions.
The doctors labeled Hoxsey the worst cancer quack of the century. But Hoxsey's supporters called him an effective healer, persecuted by a medical trust.
But up to now, they have never proven that this treatment don't cure cancer.
The ex-coal miner with an 8th grade education became a legend in his own time. According to the Hoxsey legend, the remedies were discovered by his great-grandfather experimenting on a sick horse. Hoxsey said his father was the first to try the medicines on people. He gave young Harry the formulas with a deathbed wish to make the treatment available to people whether or not they could pay. He insisted it carry the Hoxsey name. Prophetically, he warned the boy against the high priests of medicine who would fight him jealously. It didn't take long. Hoxsey started his first clinic in Illinois in 1924, and he immediately incurred the wrath of organized medicine. He was arrested more times than any other man in medical history. Yet by the 1950s, the Hoxsey Clinic of Dallas, Texas was the largest privately owned cancer center in the world. Hoxsey clinics reached through 17 states. Endorsing the treatment were senators, judges, and even some doctors. 2 federal courts upheld its therapeutic value. If the treatment was worthless, how did it gain so much support? To claim a cure for cancer is to invite evaluation. While the medical profession turned its back on Hoxsey, numerous individuals did make personal investigations. These experiences repeatedly turned skeptics into believers. Among them was Esquire magazine writer James Wakefield Burke, who in 1939 began covering the Hoxsey story.
My boss, Arnold Gingrich, one day said, "Why don't you go down to Texas and let's expose this fellow. He's getting too big." And the American Medical Association liked to put him out of business and said, "You go down and get acquainted with him," and says, "We'll do a couple of pieces on him and put an end to this." So it was an assignment. I came to Texas. I expected to stay about a day, get my information, and leave. I became fascinated. I stayed for 6 weeks. Every day, Harry would pick me up, bring me to the clinic. He was a fascinating man. He was highly intelligent, but a rather crude talking, not in an obscene or vulgar way. We'd come in the morning, and he would put his arm around these old men and women, say, "Dad, them doctors been cutting you up." Says, "I ain't gonna let them sons of bitches kill you. You're gonna live." And he'd treat them, and I'd watch him treat them. They'd get better and begin to get well. So I wrote an outline for a piece which I called "The Quack Who Cured Cancer." And I sent it back to the editors, but I guess it was too hot for him. It never came out.
Assistant District Attorney Al Templeton was more than a skeptic. He arrested Hoxsey more than 100 times in 2 years, but each time Hoxsey was prepared.
He always carried about $10,000 and rolled in his pocket. Well, they'd pick him up and put him in jail. He'd bail himself out. Once in a while, he would deliberately stay in jail a few days. He knew what would happen. His old men and women that he had cured would come around the jail, bring baskets of chicken, home-cooked pies, pray and sing. And the jailers would turn him out, save themselves the embarrassment.
Patients refused to testify against Hoxsey, so none of D.A. Templeton's charges resulted in conviction. But the prosecutor was determined to stop him. Then his own brother, Mike, got terminal cancer and secretly went to Hoxsey. When Mike Templeton got well, Al Templeton gave Hoxsey the credit. Hoxsey's prosecutor became his lawyer. He was later elected county judge. Suddenly, Hoxsey had friends at the Dallas courthouse. Like James Burke and Al Templeton, Mildred Nelson had heard Hoxsey was a fraud. Then the young nurse's mother developed uterine cancer. Despite intensive radiation treatment, the disease recurred within a year. The doctors had done all they could.
Dad asked me, said, "Do you want to go to Dallas with me and drive for me?" And I said, "Oh, you're going to get some parts for the Caterpillar." "No, I'm going to see the doctor." "What doctor?" "A cancer doctor." I said, "Dad, we're going to the best there is. Just forget that. You're going to see a damn quack." And he said, "Well, I'm going down anyway. If you don't want to go, it's fine." I said, "No, I'll go with you." So we get down there, and he introduced me, tells Harry I'm a nurse. He said, "Well, the doctors and nurses are working in there. Go in and talk to anybody you want to. There's the files. Get in them if you want to. And would you like a job?" And Dad looked up and said, "She's already said you was a damn quack." I didn't feel very good about that. Well, I thought, well, I'll talk Mom out of it, and get them away from there, and then I could talk to them. Well, I couldn't. They didn't budge. So I thought, well, I'll go down there and go to work and see what's going on. Then I can get them out of it. I called Harry and asked him if he still needed a nurse. "I sure do. Be here in the morning." And by the end of a year, I began to realize, gee, this does help. Mom had gotten better. And till this day is alive and as sassy as can be.
I've outlived them. 2 of them, local doctors. And then the doctors in Fort Worth have also passed away. And the nurses, all except 2, have passed away. As far as I know, I've outlived all of them.
More and more people kept supporting Hoxsey's claims of a cure. His boldest promoter was Christian evangelist Gerald Winrod. His radio broadcast reached millions of listeners with sensational reports of Hoxsey's mounting successes.
I wish to begin this broadcast by reading for you what I regard as a very important statement, and I quote, Judge W.L. Thornton, This is the second jury of 12 men that has found in my court that the Hoxsey treatment cures cancer. 10 doctors found that the number of cures reaches into the thousands.
Former United States Senator Thomas studied a large number of cures. I had made my own investigation, had satisfied myself that cancer was really being cured by the Hoxsey method.
This humble reporter can only say, God bless these quacks, the only quacks who are curing cancer today.
Despite far-reaching support, Hoxsey struggled to keep his clinic open. Word of his trials again reached writer James Burke. Still working for Esquire 15 years later, Burke had covered World War II and remained in Berlin serving as a top advisor to General Lucius D. Clay. But the writer was to return to Texas.
He wanted to put me on the payroll. I didn't want that because I realized once I was on the payroll, my effectiveness for him would diminish or become nil because I'd be just as guilty as he was. I said, no, I don't need this, so I believe in what you're doing, and I believe you cure cancer, and I believe these people unjustly persecuting you, and I'll help you all I can. So from then on, we became a pretty good team.
The once skeptical reporter signed on as Hoxsey's publicity director. Personal investigations continue to occur today. Another skeptical reporter visited the Hoxsey Clinic recently. This time it was in Mexico, and Mildred Nelson was in charge.
When I first came here to the Hoxsey Clinic, I fully expected to find the worst, most outrageous form of quackery and fraud. This is what I've been led to believe went on here by the medical authorities back in the States. Instead, I found something surprisingly and entirely different. When I first came here, however, and met Mildred Nelson, she didn't have a lot of time for me. She was too busy with her patients. So she told me to talk to some patients if I wanted to really find out the story of Hoxsey today. And over the next week or 10 days, I did that. I talked to at least 100 current Hoxsey patients suffering from a variety of cancers, many of them in terminal stages. It's hard to summarize 100 or so individual stories in a few sentences, but I found that virtually all of the patients I talked with had evidence that they had been helped, and also that they had a renewed sense of hope for the future.
But a new cancer treatment needs more than personal investigations to gain acceptance. It needs a formal scientific review.
And when I say to you, all I want is to have them come here. The American Medical Association, the Pure Food and Drug, the federal government, anybody, come here and make an investigation. And if I don't prove to them beyond any question of a doubt that our treatment is superior to radium X-ray and surgery, then I will lock the doors of this institution forever.
The medical establishment, if you will, felt that any effort on their part to either go and review the work or the material that Mr. Hoxsey might present to them would do little more than give credibility to the program and would not, in fact, accomplish anything meaningful.
The doctors claim that they already knew from their medical education that his remedies were had no efficaciousness at all, was no cure. They were just set in their ways and adamant in their beliefs.
He's like all the rest of them. They all say they're treated unfairly, that medicine won't pay attention to them. And it's true because medicine doesn't, or does know, that their products are worthless.
According to Hoxsey, there was a more sinister reason the medical profession wouldn't investigate. His early fame in Illinois had soon reached the nearby Chicago headquarters of the American Medical Association. Hoxsey said the AMA doctors invited him to demonstrate the treatment. Among them was Dr. Morris Fishbein, editor of the influential AMA Journal. The alleged test case was a terminal cancer patient, Police Sergeant Thomas Mannix. According to Hoxie, the day after his successful demonstration, a high AMA official asked to buy the rights to the formulas. The alleged offer would have given all rights to a group of doctors, including Dr. Fishbein. Mildred Nelson recalls Hoxie's version of the story.
And they were in the process of drawing up the contract and everything that they would take the formula. And he said, you have to put in here that no one can be turned down because of the lack of funds. And they said, oh no. And he said, yes, this is a promise I made my father on his deathbed. This must go in it. You have nothing to do with this. We'll charge what we want to. And he said, you can't. You have to keep it in reach of everyone. This must be done. And they said, no, we'll charge what we want to and treat who we want to. You have nothing to say about it. He said, well, then you don't get the formula. And that's when the battle started. And went for the rest of the years of his life.
Did AMA doctors try to suppress a cancer cure they couldn't control? Hoxie's shocking charges became shrouded in unprovable mystery when the AMA denied the entire incident. Evidence confirms only the medical case, not the circumstances. But one thing was certain. Hoxie had made a very powerful enemy. By crossing swords with Dr. Fishbein, he alienated the most influential figure in medicine. Dr. Fishbein held a unique position. As journal editor, he controlled the main income-producing organ of the AMA and thus the organization. He also published the accepted standards of medical practice. After the Chicago incident, Dr. Fishbein blackballed Hoxie by branding him a quack in the journal. But he went even further. The journal accused him of using brutal external pastes that ate fatally into patients' blood vessels. It commented that Hoxie's most enthusiastic supporter was the local undertaker. The AMA attack was relentless. Dr. Fishbein and Hoxie would battle each other for 25 years to come in a drama of national dimensions. But rather than settling the dispute through scientific means, they played it out in the media.
At the association's headquarters in Chicago, vigilant against quackery is Dr. Morris Fishbein.
There is no serum, drug, or combination of drugs that we know that will definitely cure cancer.
Hoxie competed for public attention to gain an investigation. He became a master of publicity, promoting his reputed cures far and wide. His stock in trade was the patient testimonial. When he gained access to an Iowa radio station, his testimonials reached millions. Owner of radio station KTNT was Norman Baker, who also provided Hoxie with a large clinic. Baker was a catalog salesman and former stage hypnotist of unsavory reputation. Hoxie's provocative broadcasts to bust the medical trust soon drew 300 patients a day. Among them was his most fantastic case. The top of Mandus Johnson's skull was rotting flesh, and rumors circulated that he had already died. But in front of 32,000 spectators, Hoxie performed the resurrection of Mandus Johnson. Hoxie and a doctor removed the now dead tumor that composed the top of Johnson's skull. Johnson would live on for 30 years and credit Hoxie with his miraculous cure. Even this spectacle of publicity did not get Hoxie an investigation. Instead, it drew an angry blast from Dr. Fishbein in the journal. The next night, gunfire sprayed KTNT during Hoxie's broadcast. He charged Dr. Fishbein with ordering his destruction, but again he had no proof. Soon their battle would reach federal levels. When Hoxie approached the National Cancer Institute for an investigation, the agency refused. The NCI said his medical records were incomplete. Hoxie said doctors refused to supply necessary records because of Dr. Fishbein's influence. The government concluded it would be a waste of public funds to investigate. Having struck oil in Texas, Hoxsey offered to pay for a test himself. His challenges were putting Dr. Fishbein under public pressure, and the doctor fought back hard in the public arena. But when he wrote blood money for the Hearst Sunday papers, he went too far.
Fishbein said, like a ghoul feasting on the bodies of the dead and the dying. And that is why Mr. Hoxsey sued Dr. Fishbein.
Hoxsey sued Dr. Fishbein and the Hearst newspaper empire for libel and slander. He didn't seem to stand a chance. The nation's most notorious quack faced a who's who of American medicine. Surprisingly, Harry Hoxsey became the first man ever to win a judgment against Dr. Fishbein and the AMA.
And how did he win? He brought in, day after day, he brought in patients who said, my doctor told me that I had cancer and I was going to die within an X number of days, and I came down here. Dr. Hoxsey cured me. Here I am. That was 2 years ago or 3 years. Patient after patient that came and made this testimony. It was very impressive.
The Hearst Fishbein defense tried to exclude the testimony of Hoxsey's allegedly cured patients.
The individual endorsement, if you will, patient endorsement, is really not the best way to evaluate a medical treatment or a medical procedure because too oftentimes these individuals are not knowledgeable enough in even their own health or what has transpired to realize that they're not the ones to make the best assessment of this.
The credibility of Hoxsey's patients was on trial, but so were the credentials of Dr. Morris Fishbein, who made astonishing admissions. Dr. Fishbein failed anatomy in medical school. He went to work at the Journal before completing his internship. In fact, he never treated a patient or practiced a day of medicine in his entire career. The leader of medicine's quack attack was increasingly on the defensive. Critics charged the AMA with being a doctors' union setting medical policy in its own interests. 2 federal courts agreed it was a monopoly. Dr. Fishbein had to resign from his post at the AMA. But the Hoxsey-Fishbein trials held an even more shocking revelation. Dr. Fishbein admitted in court that Hoxsey's supposedly brutal pastes actually did cure external cancers.
There was a man up in the University of Wisconsin who did some experimental work on skin cancer with this material, using very minute amounts of it and using it several times very carefully. And he reported on it, and it was reported in our journal that it did have merit.
Mildred Nelson uses 2 forms of Hoxsey external medicines, a yellow powder and a red paste. They are an old kind of folk medicine called escharotics.
This is the yellow powder that we used. It's selective for malignant tissue only. It will not bother the other. Only the malignant part dies. And then it separates itself from the normal tissue by an accumulation of white cells underneath, and this pushes it off.
The red paste is not selective. It is used to dissolve large tumors.
This is true escharotic. Your escharotic is something that burns. Actually, it is a burning product that will, in one sense of the word, eat or destroy the skin, or wherever. You put it on an area, and that area will come out. Almost as though you had taken a knife and cut it out or scooped it out.
The red paste contains bloodroot. Bloodroot is an herb whose use goes back centuries.
Here's the bloodroot, one that Hoxsey was using for external treatment of cancer. It's a common wildflower here in the eastern deciduous forest. The Indians did use this for external cancerous conditions, and this was picked up early by the traveling doctors of European descent. And this, with zinc oxide and several other herbs, plus or minus, showed up in many different formulas for external cancers. So many formulas, in fact, that one would suspect it must have some positive effect. Sanguinarine, by the way, is another of the alkaloids that did show some anti-tumor activity in the NCI experimental studies.
Even though the AMA admitted that the external treatment works, Hoxie's successes only escalated the war. He soon faced another determined opponent, the federal government. The Food and Drug Administration said his internal treatment was a fake. The federal agency contended that his supposed internal cures fell into 3 categories.
FDA went out and looked at these cases one by one, found evidence that essentially a good portion of them, there was no evidence they ever had cancer.
There is also the business of persons with cancer having had treatments like therapeutic X-ray, the effects of which are delayed in many cases. And during that time, they will go to these people, like Hoxie, who take advantage of a cure they did not perform.
The third category would be the people he treated who had cancer to start with, who had cancer to end with, the end often being death.
Well, the original diagnosis was called lymphosarcoma. And this surgeon in Pittsburgh operated on me, and he cut me open, and he looked, and when he saw what he saw, he closed me right up again. It was lymphosarcoma, but it involved 2 tumors intertwined around my aorta, lesions in the right lung, a blockage of what they call the superior vena cava, which is a vein leading into the heart, and it was in all my lymph glands. So he closed me right up, and his verdict was 1 year to live. Now, they did give me 30 cobalts, but the verdict was still 1 year to live. So I felt I was going downhill. I know I was going downhill. And when the Hoxie was presented to me by a total stranger, I said to my husband, I'm going to try this. And if I'm still here 6 months from now, I'm going back. And if I'm not, what did I lose? A plane fare? A couple $100? So I did. I went to Dallas, and it was available. And I'm still here 20 years from now to tell my story. And I'm positive it's the Hoxie that has kept me here.
But he was never investigated except in a criminal type of a way to see what he might be doing wrong. The Food and Drug have always been famous for harassing the Hoxie patients in one manner or another, usually doing it to find something to harass Harry with. Go to people's houses, take their medicine when it was delivered to them, talk to them, tell them they were doing wrong.
But they didn't investigate anything except to do underhanded work, to try to find something detrimental.
Well, what about this ulcer of mine, Mr. Oakwood? I've been afraid that it might turn to cancer. Would your stuff help that?
Might be cancer, huh? Well, now, look, there's one thing you got to remember. You see, this stuff ain't no medicine. But then, of course, cancer, that's just another name for a bunch of cells that are gone wild. You know, because they're lacking something. But look, you give your body everything that it needs, and them cells are satisfied, then, like as not, your condition's going to improve.
The FDA carried out a thorough investigation into possible criminal activities. The agency revealed that Hoxie had donated $80,000 to evangelist Gerald Winrod. They also produced records of secret checks to the writer from Man's Magazine after his first article. Moreover, several of Hoxie's advertised cures had since died of cancer. But when the government couldn't stop Hoxie in court, the FDA decided to take unprecedented action.
Sufferers from cancer, their families, physicians, and all concerned with the care of cancer patients are hereby advised and warned that the so-called Hoxie treatment for internal cancer has been found by the U.S. Court of Appeals for the 5th District on the basis of evidence presented by the FDA to be a worthless treatment. And it went on. And it was so successful that the FDA then went ahead and issued it in a poster form, which was put up in post offices around the country.
And one patient would call and say, well, I'm going to get it down. The next one called and said, may I take it down? And then they began calling, telling how they got them down.
I'm swimming in blood now. They've done everything they possibly can to try to humiliate me. They've had me in court many, many times. But do I care about that? I'm not thinking about what they're doing to me. I'm thinking about the 12,000 patients who's under treatment observation here at this clinic. I'm only thinking of one thing: suffering humanity.
But the government did more than just warn the public. Although federal prosecutors couldn't prove the treatment was worthless, they did outlaw it on technicalities like false labeling in interstate commerce.
At one time, we had 17 clinics open across the country. Food and Drug walked in the same day to every one of them and padlocked them. And no way did Harry have the money to fight that in court, state by state.
Mildred Nelson took the Hoxsey treatment to Mexico in 1963. Harry Hoxsey stayed in the oil business in Dallas.
He said, the one thing I want you to do is drop the Hoxsey name. Change the name. And I said, why, Harry? People won't even know what it is if we do that. No, the problem has been the Hoxsey name. Drop the name and it will make it easier for you. Well, I dropped the name, but the patients didn't. It's still to them Hoxsey.
Word of mouth still brings many patients to Hoxsey in Mexico. But today, their testimonials are still the only indication of the therapy's possible worth. The medical profession does not accept this anecdotal evidence as valid data. Few doctors today know the remarkable story of Hoxsey. To most of them, the Hoxsey Clinic is just another quack therapy in Mexico, unworthy of serious investigation. The arguments against investigating Hoxsey are about the same as those for all the alternative approaches. What are these reasons? The doctors say that a formal investigation would falsely raise patients' hopes of a real cure. They say that quacks are in it, just for the money. Worst of all, they say that going to a quack prevents getting proper medical treatment.
There's nothing you can do unless my mother asks you. These quacks, once they get to a patient, anything can happen. Proper treatment can be delayed often until it's too late. Many people would go to a doctor earlier if they didn't trust some quack who was doing nothing for them.
Hoxsey was certainly a bad man. He was bad in so many ways that are obvious, but I think perhaps the main way that he was a force for evil was that he prevented so many people from getting treatment at an appropriate time.
Doctors use surgery, radiation, and chemotherapy in the treatment of cancer. But if 2 of 3 patients still die, how effective are these approved methods? Surgery is the oldest technique and the most successful of the 3. But surgery is useful only when the cancer is localized, a minority of cases.
Well, I was still in the hospital from the surgery. And he sat down on the edge of my bed and he said, I have bad news for you. We did all we could. We took all the organs that we could take, and it has gone into your liver, and for that we can't do anything.
Nearly all cancer is curable if we get it early enough. The real danger is delay. An operation now will save Mrs. Green's life.
An operation?
Many patients also fear surgery's traumatic effects.
Well, what they wanted to do was first remove the teeth and remove this half of my
gum. They were talking originally about taking part of the jaw down here because they thought maybe it had worked its way in this area. To remove the upper palate. On the left side, when they did take the biopsy, the whole left side of my palate was swollen, almost down even with the bottom of my teeth. They were going to start with that and just kind of work their way back to whatever they needed.
Oh, and I forgot to tell you that when they operated on my arm in Las Vegas, then they said that if the arm didn't heal within a year, they would have to amputate my arm.
Radiation treatment is a modern form of another ancient method, burning the tumor.
Well, what cured you? Radioactivity, Harry.
Radioactivity? What's that got to do with medicine?
Harry, they tell me the atom is adding a dimension to medical research and treatment that they never dreamed of a few years ago.
Patients also fear radiation's dangerous side effects. One of these is that radiation can actually cause cancer.
This is what we've been waiting for, Mr. Knox. Now, Mr. Knox, if you'll just step over here to the sink and drink this.
Well, if you say so, Doctor. Looks harmless enough. Just like water. Well, here's to my health.
One of the doctors had as a suggestion, had said something to the effect of removing the palate, most of the palate, and plating it in gold or putting one in gold so that they could do radiation in the rest of the areas of the mouth without affecting the lower skull or upper brain or the brain area. And so that was what one of them wanted to do. So
the use of radiation remains controversial even in medical circles. By itself, it is seldom considered a cure. It can be effective only on localized tumors. It does not address the fact that cancer is a systemic disease. Doctors took a systemic approach to cancer with the introduction of chemotherapy drugs in the 1950s. Chemotherapy is designed to kill cancer cells throughout the body. It is highly toxic, however, and it also kills healthy cells. Today, chemotherapy is often given in combination with surgery and radiation.
I, like so many millions before me, started down the road of orthodox therapy. I knew no options were available. I, like the average person, believed everything my doctor told me. And I took 6,000 rads of radiation, which is the most you can take. Any more, you run the risk of a total paralysis since the electron beam has to be focused to the spinal column. And we'd all sit together waiting to go into the room with a linear accelerator, where we were the only one in the room and everybody else was outside the room. But looking at the patients that had already started to receive chemotherapy, looking at them, the women had wigs, the complexion of the men and women were like a piece of white paper. Most of them had already lost weight, and it's terrifying. It really is. Because not only are you worried about dying, now you begin to worry about how it's going to be to die. And so when I started the chemotherapy, I'll never forget what it was like the first time, the first moment that the intravenous solution is shot into your veins, because I took Cytoxan as the first drug, and it works instantaneously. The plunger is moved a 1/16 of an inch from the great big syringe, and you turn on like this. And with Cytoxan, and my reaction to Cytoxan, it was absolutely mind-blowing. It was like somebody hit me with a sledgehammer in the middle of my head, and I got sick to my stomach all at the same time. But I want to make this very clear.
if you really believed that these things worked, and if the data supported the fact that Cytoxan or cisplatin or any of the chemotherapeutic drugs, all of which are cytotoxic, all of which are indiscriminate killers of cells, all of which are carcinogenic, which is philosophically extraordinary. If you really thought that it would help you, then you'd go with it.
Recently, John Cairns of Harvard University published a study in Scientific American about cancer chemotherapy drugs. He found that chemotherapy drugs benefit at most 5%, 1 out of 20 of the cancer patients they're given to, and yet chemotherapy is routinely given to 50% of American cancer patients. This is not to suggest that there's no role for conventional treatments in cancer therapy. Even Mildred Nelson suggests that some of her patients occasionally have conventional treatment when it's absolutely necessary, but seeing then conventional treatments as options and not ends in themselves.
Harry Hoxsey generally opposed conventional treatment. But when he himself developed prostate cancer, he faced every patient's dilemma. He took his own tonic, but it didn't work for him. Finally, he had the very surgery he had criticized. He lived on for 7 years. Hoxsey died of heart failure and a weak liver, according to his physician, a noted neurologist. But the doctor was out of town when Hoxsey actually died. Another doctor signed the death certificate. He wrote, "Carcinoma, prostate." Even in death, Harry Hoxsey was marked by a conflict of medical opinion. Actually, the conflict of medical opinion between Hoxsey and the doctors is a competition between two old medical traditions. In the 1800s, society sanctioned both approaches to healing. Patients had a choice of using either doctors, called allopaths, or natural healers, called empirics or homeopaths. The two groups waged a bitter philosophical debate. The allopathic doctors called their approach heroic medicine. They believed the physician must aggressively drive disease from the body. They based their practice on what they considered scientific theory. The allopaths used 3 main techniques. They bled the body to drain out the bad humors. They gave huge doses of toxic minerals like mercury and lead to displace the original disease. They also used surgery, but it was a brutal procedure before anesthesia and infection control. Few patients were willing to have surgery. Most patients feared allopathic methods altogether. Satirists of the day remarked that with allopathic treatment, the patient died of the cure. Competing with the doctors were the empiric healers. Contrary to the doctors, they believed in stimulating the body's own defenses to heal itself. Instead of poisonous minerals, they used vegetable products and non-toxic substances in small quantities. They especially favored herbs learned from Native American and old European traditions. The empirics said they based their remedies not on theory, but on observation and experience. Satirists of the day added that with empiric treatment, the patient died of the disease, not the cure. The Hoxsey herbs come from the empiric tradition. According to Hoxsey, they had a surprising origin on an Illinois horse farm in 1840. As the story goes, John Hoxsey was a veterinarian whose prize stallion got cancer. He put it out to pasture to die. But 3 weeks later, the tumor had stabilized. He observed the horse eating unusual plants, not part of its normal diet. Within a year, the horse was well. So John Hoxsey began to experiment on animals with the herbs, and he added other popular home remedies. He claimed success and passed the formulas down through the family, who eventually used them on people.
But the idea that the American Indians or this person or that person or a veterinarian would accidentally stumble upon some herb that would cure a large number of products is rather far-fetched. It's like the idea that if you put 3 billion monkeys in a room, one of them might write a Shakespearean sonnet.
And now the food and drug people want to know, what is Elixir X? What's in it? In every district station is a battery of crack chemists and microanalysts who fight the battle against filth and fraud. To one of these comes Elixir X. The magic formula to relieve sickness and pain turns out to be nothing more than a mixture of water and an alcoholic extract of certain herbaceous weeds that grow in profusion in the maker's backyard.
A lot of modern folk tend to think that the herb medicines are just a bunch of weeds. I have a contrary view. I really think that the herbal medicines may be the wave of the future. The National Cancer Institute, with which I collaborated up until 1981, has screened over 10% of the plant species of the world, including all that are in the Hoxsey formula. I might add that all of them showed up in Jonathan Hartwell's Plants Used Against Cancer. Jonathan Hartwell was a chemist employed by the National Cancer Institute who went through all the folk literature. Every one of the species in the Hoxsey formula were covered in Hartwell, and the least citations that one got was 3 citations. Some of them got over 30 citations in that particular book, done while Hartwell was with the National Cancer Institute.
Among the 50% of modern pharmaceutical drugs that are derived from plants are some cancer chemotherapy drugs. The periwinkle plant, which is common in many parts of the U.S., is the basis for vincristine and vinblastine, two drugs that are commonly used to treat leukemia.
Let's suppose the Hoxsey herbs are worthless. Why do some patients appear to benefit from the treatment? The doctors have always said what Hoxsey was really offering was not medicine, it was hope.
These people have one simple thing in common. They were frightened, confused, and did not know which way to turn for help. Fear is like a bullet. An idea fired into the mind, it can fester and kill with deadly accuracy. Sentence a patient to death, remove all hope, and he will obediently roll over to wither away. Their tissue, their bones, their blood may be diseased, but their will to live is sound and healthy. That is why they are here. When the horror of this ugly scavenger casts its shadow, each one of these people has asked, "What do you do? Where do you go?" This place is their beacon of hope, the ray of light that might lead the way.
He would come in and he'd put his arm around those old people, and somehow he had the ability to inspire them to get well. He must have triggered something in their psyche or in their physical makeup that perhaps, who knows, triggered something in them that made them cure themselves.
This clinic, just coming into the clinic, you get an entirely different sense of, say when you go to a cold, sterile hospital, nobody talks to anybody and everybody is afraid. It was really interesting when my husband,
That's one
remember
thing that
that?
impressed me, because I thought this was a psychiatric place. All these people laughing and talking, and they're supposed to be sick. You get to talking to them, and they are. They've got very serious illnesses, but yet they're happy, they're talking. And I just couldn't. Well, I never saw anything like it before.
Because we have hope. We know cancer doesn't have to be a death sentence.
And I think that's something that you see as you travel around the world and visit alternative cancer clinics. You find in all of them there are some people who got better. Maybe it's only 10%. My comment generally is it's those people who have done it. I'm not sure that any of those therapies mean anything, but it has given them hope, instant group therapy, because a lot of people come together with those beliefs, and you see something happen.
Oh, they're all free-thinking people, or they wouldn't even be here. And the majority of them make up their mind before they get here. This is what they're going to do, and they are going to win it.
Well, these are the things. People who think they've been treated, it's up here. It's in their minds and in their hopes, you might say, and their unwillingness to face reality.
And the answer is period. There is no false hope in the individual who has an illness. It is real, it is physiologic, and I have no difficulty giving it to people. Because I know people today who are alive because I said you don't have to die.
If hope alone can produce cures from cancer, was Hoxsey wrong in offering patients hope? But the doctor said he wasn't just offering hope. He was selling it.
Mom, a quack is a quack, whether he comes from the South Seas or lives right here in the city. All he's interested in is taking money from people.
Frankly, I think that he was avaricious and in it for the money.
It was the money. This is true of all of them. There is no charity in their hearts, believe me.
Well, they've probably been all the way back to early man. There have been people that would take other people's clamshells or their dollars, but he was certainly a master at it. Yes.
Unlike many other medical institutions, money is the last thing on the agenda. No patient is turned away because of his inability to pay. It is a policy handed down by Dr. Hoxie's father.
I don't have to do this kind of work. I've got more oil wells than a lot of men call themselves big producers. I own my own building equipment, my own operations. I have enough money to burn up a wet mule. So what do I need with money from cancer sufferers? Any man that would traffic on sick, dying, limp, the lame, and the blind caused from cancer is the worst scoundrel on earth.
Now, I have seen relatives bring an old mother or an old aunt or an old granddad or somebody in that the doctors had given up to die. And after being interviewed, they said, we only had enough money to get here. Harry would personally take that old lady or that old woman in his car down the street. In those days, there were some boarding houses and small hotels. Put them in a boarding house or hotel, pay all their bills, treat them for 6 or 8 weeks till they were cured, send them home, pay their bus fare back home or airplane fare with enough medicine to last and say, if you need to come back, write me a letter and I'll send for you. How can you not help a man like that?
I came 2 years ago and I think I paid $1,600, and that was a lifetime fee. That's including all my doctor visits, all my medications, unless there is an extra special thing that I have to get somewhere else.
So the finances, without both insurance companies, it's no real burden. And compared to what we spent, say, $10,000 in less than 2 weeks when she first had surgery.
Well, this doctor, he really screamed and hollered at me, and so this doctor quit then said, why are you going down there? They're going to take all your money. And I said, because you already did.
The war of money between Hoxie and the doctors is another old story in medicine. In the 1800s, doctors tried to stop the popular empirics from collecting their fees by denouncing them as quacks. Economic competition from the empiric healers caused the doctors to found the American Medical Association. But the AMA was a small trade association without political clout, and the balance of medical power remained equal until the turn of the century. Then, new medical treatments emerged that were potentially very profitable. Promoting these methods, the AMA joined with strong financial forces to transform medicine into an industry. The fortunes of Carnegie, Morgan, and Rockefeller financed surgery, radiation, and synthetic drugs. They were to become the economic foundations of the new medical economy. Ironically, John D. Rockefeller himself used only an empiric homeopath while investing in allopathic medicine. Surgery became viable with anesthesia and infection control, and doctors advocated expensive, radical operations. These in turn produced the need for a large, lucrative hospital system. The allopaths also discovered a new toxic mineral, radium. Radium fever swept medicine. The price of radium rose 1,000% almost overnight. Another costly technological industry entered the hospital system. A drug industry grew out of the booming patent medicine business. Ironically, many of the new synthetic drugs came from plants and empiric remedies. Drug company ads boosted the revenues of the AMA Journal 500% in 10 years. The doctors changed educational standards and licensing regulations to exclude the empirics. Soon, only AMA-approved doctors could legally practice medicine. In a brief 20 years, the AMA came to dominate medical practice. Organized Medicine launched a media campaign to associate the empirics with quacks. The code word for competition was quackery.
The rats in those cages were fed on a special whole wheat bread containing molasses, salt, honey, malt, caramel, yeast.
We had the brain of the wolf for cunning.
Plus dehydrated vegetable flours made from carrots, spinach, kelp, lettuce, pumpkin.
Come on, step right up, gents. What do you got to lose except all your aches and pains?
Cabbage, parsley, and onions, potatoes, bone meal, and sunflower seeds.
You're kidding.
No, this is a special health bread, marketed at about twice the price of ordinary bread.
To make your skin as smooth as a lotus blossom, and may love attend you forever.
Now, these poor rats had only ordinary enriched white bread.
Well, I'll be darned.
I can't find any differences. Neither can the scales nor the rats.
How many people have died as a result of your treatment? How many victims have you left in broken health? How much money have you made from this racket?
The AMA targeted Harry Hoxsey as public quack #1. But by the 1940s, its quack files had swelled to include 300,000 names. Hoxsey had long charged a conspiracy. His solitary voice was now echoed by many others. In the 1950s, a congressional committee came to the same conclusion. The Fitzgerald Report to Congress named at least a dozen other promising cancer treatments seemingly blocked by organized medicine. Their proponents were mostly doctors and scientists of high reputation. The treatments were immunological or nutritional. Dismissing them as quackery were panels of surgeons and radiation therapists. The congressional report emphasized two outstanding cases of alleged suppression, Harry Hoxsey and Dr. Andrew C. Ivy. If Hoxsey fit the image of a quack, Dr. Ivy certainly did not.
Dr. Ivy is the recipient of half a dozen honorary degrees as well as a dozen international awards. Organizer of the Naval Medical Research Institute, Bethesda, Maryland. Former executive director of the National Advisory Cancer Council. Vice President, University of Illinois. Former board member, American Cancer Society. For his association with Chrobiazin, Dr. Ivy was discredited by the scientific community. He was suspended by the Chicago Medical Society for 3 months. He was deprived of his post as vice president of the University of Illinois, and he voluntarily resigned from the American Medical Association. The legislators in 1953 appointed a commission to determine whether or not there was a conspiracy against Chrobiazin and its sponsors. Target of the most serious accusation was Dr. J.J. Moore, treasurer of the AMA at the time of its Chrobiazin status report and a well-known Chicago pathologist. Dr. Dorovic charged that Dr. Moore tried to get him to give distribution rights of the drug to two businessmen, friends of Dr. Moore. Dr. Dorovic asserted that Dr. Moore, when denied any participation for his friends, threatened to destroy Chrobiazin, Dr. Dorovic, and Dr. Ivy through his influence in the AMA and at the university.
The similarity of Dr. Ivy's charges to those of Hoxsey was unmistakable. A failed attempt by an AMA official to buy his formulas, followed by blackballing and a refusal to test the therapy. The Fitzgerald Report to Congress described a menacing pattern.
Fitzgerald concluded in his report, quote, "Behind this is the weirdest conglomeration of corrupt motives, intrigue, selfishness, jealousy, obstruction, and conspiracy that I have ever seen."
Despite its shocking conclusions, the Fitzgerald Report slipped quietly into the appendix of the congressional record. With Dr. Ivy's death, Chrobiazin would vanish untested. At the height of the McCarthy era, a dozen other promising treatments would be banned without investigation.
There are many cases to be cited in terms of congressional investigations, and it's really kind of pathetic, particularly for somebody like me that is a cancer patient and all the other people out there with cancer. If they were to go through the litany of congressional investigations looking into cancer and read the 1953 Fitzgerald Report on the Hoxsey therapy, if they read the 1963 hearings of Senator Paul Douglas of Illinois on Chrobiazin, and if they read the 1981 hearings of Senator Paula Hawkins of Florida that was investigating the fraud at the National Cancer Institute, if the average person realized what I'm telling you here today, I think there would be an uproar that would be enormous. And that's exactly what it's going to take to change the system.
In 1986, an uproar by cancer patients prompted Congress to look into new charges of medical suppression. The pattern of events is alarmingly familiar. Cancer researcher Lawrence Burton held a successful demonstration of his immunological treatment, reported by the national press. Still, the National Cancer Institute refused him an investigation. Burton later charged the NCI with underhandedly trying to obtain his methods. Under pressure, Burton finally moved his clinic to the Bahamas in the 1970s, but his troubles did not end there.
It's believed as many as 1,000 cancer patients have come to Freeport's Immunology Researching Center since it opened in the late 1970s. Their treatment included injections of blood serums aimed at helping them fight off their cancer. But doctors in Florida and Washington say those injections were contaminated because AIDS antibodies were found to be present in the serum. Bahamian authorities recently closed down the center. Cancer patients all over the country who came here seeking a cure fear they may now be infected with AIDS. While some of his patients, like Lester Maddox, fear they may get AIDS from the clinic, others believe they've been condemned to die from cancer because the Freeport Clinic is now out of business. Al Sunshine, CNN, Miami.
The Congressional Committee has since made these findings. The contamination report was false. It came from a high NCI official. The inaccurate report was circulated in the AMA Journal and by officials from the White House and State Department. The clinic closure coincided with the U.S. release of a new drug strikingly similar to Burton's approach. As a result, 38 congressmen have signed a formal request for an independent federal evaluation of alternative cancer therapies.
Now the question arises, is there a honest, premeditated, conspiratorial activity underway to maintain the status quo, to prevent, if you will, a cure to cancer? And I say no. But there is a system that we have which has evolved over the years, which include the National Cancer Institute, the Food and Drug Administration, federal government, parts of Congress that oversee these groups, pharmaceutical companies who peddle the drugs, who do the basic toxicity testing of almost all the drugs. A way of business has been established. A way of business has been established. And they're not going to let anybody from outside break into the inner club.
Cancer is a big business, one of the biggest businesses. The typical cancer patient spends at least $50,000 to treat his or her disease. With 1 million new American cancer patients every year, that translates to $50 billion annually spent on cancer treatment in the United States. Another fact, and this is the real bottom line, there are more people making a living from conventional cancer research and treatment than are dying from the disease every year.
The last figure that I saw in a trade journal known as the Chemical Marketing Reporter indicated that it costs $96 million to prove a drug is safe and efficacious. What drug company in its right mind would want to prove that an herb would cure disease X if it's going to cost them $96 million and then you and I can grow this herb in our backyard? How do they get their $96 million back? This is a big problem, and I don't see any solution at the moment.
The Director General, Dr. Halfdan Mahler of the World Health Organization, made a very dramatic announcement when he said that the poor of the world simply can't afford industrial medicine because of the costs. What medicine can they afford but the medicine of their native healers, who by and large utilize the local herbs for health care and know those traditions quite thoroughly. So there is now a worldwide push to promote the practice of the native healer in all of the traditional societies in the world who depend on herbal medicine.
Recently, the National Cancer Institute gave a large grant to the Bronx, New York Botanical Garden to scour the far corners of the world in search of traditional plants that might have action against cancer. The NCI said that this is one of the most promising areas for future cancer treatment. The scientists are going to interview traditional tribal shamans and doctors to find out what they know about treating cancer with herbs and plants. It would seem that the NCI should not ignore traditional native North American herbs and plants either, which have action against cancer, some of which have been used for decades now as part of the Hoxsey therapy. Until recently, doctors have been limited to using 3 therapies to treat cancer: surgery, radiation, and chemotherapy. Perhaps the new directions of research now coming out of the NCI and elsewhere will finally allow physicians more freedom to truly practice medicine.
I think definitely doctors need to be educated. I think they really don't realize what a help this clinic or other clinics can be for cancer victims.
You shouldn't have to go out of the country since we're supposed to have the best medicine systems in the world and whatnot. It just seems kind of ironic sometimes.
I think that we should have freedom of information, and then we should have freedom of choice. And that should be made available to the public, and then let them choose what route they're going to take. I mean, I think we're all adults mainly, and in charge of our own destiny, and we should be allowed to go whatever route we think would be best for us.
So there really is no freedom or lack of freedom and choice in telling people that they can't lie, they can't advertise falsely.
I hate to see people go for alternative therapies when they have a very good chance of being cured, say at that moment in a traditional way, because I know that they're increasing their risk and they may die pursuing something that doesn't work. But I have to say it is their life, not mine, and I can state honestly what I think, and I say to a lot of people, I wouldn't do what you're doing. They don't run out the door with that. They say, okay, but this is my choice and this is what I want to do.
We feel that cancer is a scary thing and it's a dangerous thing. So sometimes we feel we have to rush right into the only thing the doctor tells us because this is life and death. And it's nice to know we have a choice.
November, I think, of '84, the year which I lost her, the doctor wrote down, he put down terminal, and that was in November of '84. Until then, I never even thought of terminal anything, but I guess her condition made him think, well, this is the state that he would classify her as. The biggest discomfort we had with this treatment was going 500 miles to get it. I've only known 1 or 2 people that underwent the traditional treatment. And from what they say, the discomfort, nausea, and stuff that they had, there was no comparison because she didn't have any of that. So I'd say initially the quality of life was actually enhanced because we were just the 2 of us. We're together, and it was kind of neat in that respect. We did things we hadn't done in a long time, and it was kind of like a little outing for she and I, because we were together. We'd go down to San Diego, we'd go to the movie. We went to the movie more in the last year of her life than we did the previous 30 years. I mean, I couldn't say, well, this doesn't work. I couldn't say this obviously does work. This is what we chose, and we felt good about it. It's unfortunate it didn't work the way we wanted it to. But as she said, once she says, well, I could have been dead already if I'd gone the other route. I think we're all right now just content, so, well, she did what she wanted to and thought was best. And I think that's the consolation that I have, that I helped her to accomplish the ends which she, to do what she wanted to do.
I've really looked at it always from a patient's point of view. And if there's something in orthodoxy, like a little bit of radiation, or the proper surgery at exactly the right time, with good nutritional support, this is what I want. What I want is whatever is best for the patient, and I don't care whether it's called orthodox, unorthodox, fringe, I don't care. There's just too many people dying. Too many people dying.
Surely to goodness we're going to have enough heart and compassion for people. But the day has to come that everybody's going to be concerned about everybody else, in some manner help take care of them. we put here for except to help each other?
In medicine especially, the goal is to help one another. Yet many patients are still caught in a medical crossfire because cancer treatment has become a political issue instead of a medical question. But we are witnessing a transformation in medicine. Treatments such as nutrition, herbal medicines, attitudinal healing, and immunology, once considered quackery, are now on the leading edge of research. It's time to end the civil war in medicine. How many lives can we save? How many treatments can we explore?
The Hoxsey treatment. Of all those people out there has to be somebody that will want to do it and to give part of themselves to take care of people that are sick. And that person will come along while I'm still physically able to train them and teach them and everything. When the day comes, I will teach them. If that doesn't happen, then I'm sorry it is lost and it wasn't intended to go on.
You know the truth, the first when I'm starting to drive, and I don't believe it really. No, honest, myself. But I see so many people to coming back to that clinic, biomedical. To be, nobody tell me people you don't help in this clinic because he helping a lot. See people coming 6 weeks to leave and people coming back. Now I don't want to say 100%, but I see people coming back. There's a lot of traffic right now. I think so. We got to take at least half an hour to cross the border, and we need to stop in United States Customs and Immigration, and you got to ask them 2 questions. The first one, what is your citizenship? Say your country, United States, or where are you from? Canada or something like that. Second question is got to be, what you have from Mexico? I want you please show you everything. What you buy your purses and special your bags from the paper bag from Biomedical, and herbs and vitamins. It's truth, we have. It's what we have.